And a 1, and a 2, and a 1, 2, 3.
Ryan Metzler's top 100 games of all time. Some are good and some are bad and some are sublime. Ryan has a PhD, loves his Euro certainly. Felt his favorite, can't you see? So here's his favorite
Top 100 games.
All right, it's time for the second session of my top 100 games. This time we're going to be taking a look at games 90 through 81. Now I want to remind everybody that just because your favorite game isn't on this list doesn't mean it's not a good game. Just because I don't show the game when I'm talking about it, there are several of these games that I don't currently have in my collection. Now that's not because I don't like the game. Obviously it's in my top 100, but you'll note that I have a limited amount of storage space. I don't have a huge game room, and I don't keep a lot of games. So either someone in my group owns the game, or I like the game but I don't have my hands on the copy right now. Doesn't matter. Just because I don't show it to you doesn't mean I don't like it. It's in my top 100 for a reason, so take that to heart. Anyhow, why don't we just get started? We'll go take a look at game number 90.
Number 90, Cosmic Encounter. Good job, Ryan.
So for the first time in my top 100, the first video is completely devoid of them, but now we're going to see an American style of game, one that is very heavily influenced by the theme of the game, and that is a game that is, well, Tom's number 1. We're talking about Cosmic Encounter, being my 90th favorite game. Now, you'll say, well, Tom has it as number 1 and you have it at number 90. Why is that? Well, he prefers a different style of game as I do, but this is the game that brought me into gaming. So I had been out of the gaming scene from playing Magic the Gathering for a long time. I went to a game store and they taught me Cosmic Encounter at that game store. And it really clicked. The game has an immense amount of variety. I mean, I don't even know how many different races. There's easy races, medium races, and then more difficult races to play with. And they cater to all different types of play styles. So the objective of the game, if you haven't played, is to essentially establish colonies on other players' areas. And be the first to a certain number. But you don't get to choose who you're attacking, so it kind of eliminates the you chose me, so I'm going to choose you aspect of conflict-style games. And I think that's a nice touch, especially for getting into that genre of games. So not only do you have the variety, but you have kind of an ease into a conflict. It just all plays out very well. So that is Cosmic Encounter, the first non-Euro style game on my top 100.
Number 89, Pixel Tactics.
Next game is another non-European style game. This time we're taking a look at a card game. So game number 89 is one that fits right here between the palms of my hands. It is Pixel Tactics. Now this is a card game in which each player represents a arrangement of a military. You have a leader and you have a deck full of people that you can play as combatants in your military. And it all plays out on a little bit of a map, something like this. This is the awesome deluxe playmat that you can get for the game that you can play out. But essentially you're going to have cards, and each of these cards can serve one of two purposes. Either it can be your leader, and you'll get one leader at the start of the game, or it can be one of the combatants in your formation here. And depending on where you place in that formation, it changes how that person or that combatant is going to act. So in the front they're a little bit more defensive, and in the back they're a little bit more ranged combat. So the game has a ton of variety, and I think that's my favorite thing about it. Basically each one of these cards can serve 4 different purposes. Leader, one of the 3 positions, I guess it's actually 5 different purposes, or you can discard them all for some type of instant effect, so they can be kind of like a spell like you would see in Magic the Gathering. So it has a huge amount of variety. Of course it's very tiny, compact, and portable, and it's a game that you can get in an incredible amount of replay out of simply because of the variety of how the cards can be used. So I definitely suggest checking this one out. It's from Level 99 Games. It's called Pixel Tactics. Awesome.
Number 88, Wallenstein.
The next game is one that is kind of an economic war-Euro combination game. It's one that's been around for a very long time, and that game is Wallenstein. Now, it's seen several different implementations, Shogun and Wallenstein, the newer version of Wallenstein, which was published in the last couple years. But this is a game about basically starting out at the beginning of a war, expanding your own controlled areas, trying to tax collect, trying to feed people, and all the time trying to prevent unrest. Now, the interesting part, and the part I think is the most intriguing to me and why it's made this list, is the tower that you're going to drop pieces into. There's a tower that you use for combat and unrest and things like that. where you drop pieces in the tower, and some of the pieces will fall out. This is essentially a modified dice tower with platforms on the inside, which allows cubes of different colors to sit on the platforms, and each time you drop more cubes in, it knocks some of the previously placed cubes out. So when you drop your cubes in, you're hoping they fall back out, but you also don't know what's left in there and what you could possibly knock out to modify the combat. So it has a little bit of a random element, but by throwing more of your own cubes in, you hopefully try and plan that you're going to get more of your own cubes out. Alternatively, if some of your cubes didn't fall out on a previous turn, there's a chance they will fall out this time, making your odds a little bit better if you had a poor round the previous time. So this cube dropping aspect and the fact that there's a little bit of semi-hidden information makes the game very interesting. It's a mechanism you see a little bit in things like El Grande, where you hide things in the tower. But overall, it's kind of something that I think is a little bit underused. I think it makes the game very interesting. That is Wallenstein, a game I think that you should check out if that mechanic sounds interesting to you.
Number 87, Timeline.
The next game in my list falls neither into the Ameritrash or into the Euro game style. It's not a dexterity game. It is an educational game is what I would classify it as. It's basically a filler game, and it's one that I carry to me anytime I go anywhere gaming. It basically sits in this game of what I call awesome card games. You'll see this box several times in the top 100 because, of course, these are games that I play a lot. Now, that game is Timeline, and you're going to say, well, this is a really odd choice. Timeline is barely even really a board game. It's essentially trying to figure out the chronological ordering of different events. And yes, it is. But there's a game involved in it. You know, whoever can get rid of their cards first is going to win. And I think the educational aspect, as well as that small little game of trying to outsmart everybody else, makes this an interesting one to me. So we have a little bit of a trivia game in my top 100. But it allows you to learn about various different things, from music to inventions to just the timing of historical events. So you grow with it, you learn more information, and at the same time you get to have fun. And if that's not what gaming's all about, then I don't know what it is. So that's Timelines from Asmodee.
Number 86, Hawaii. Whatever.
The next game on my list is not one that is universally loved by the Dice Tower, and that game is Hawaii. You may have seen Tom destroy it in his videos. It got hit with some trimming shears, and it was out in his lawn. And I pulled it from the trash and kind of tried to give a renewed perspective of it. And we actually had the same copy. Tom gave his copy to me, and I did my review of it. Now, the game can be a little bit mathy, but the game overall is pretty easy to learn, and it's one that has a theme that is kind of fun, but not the greatest Euro game, and that's why it's not at the top of my list. The game is about being on Hawaii and trying to accumulate buildings to add to your own village, be those buildings, god shrines or fruit stands that benefit from having more fruit, or whatever the case may be. You're using 3 different currencies to do this. You're trying to move your guy around a modular board that changes a little bit. I mean, there's not a whole lot of change. The buildings are generally in the same place, but the prices or availability of things will change as the game goes on or between different games. So you're using your kahuna to navigate around, but you need 3 currencies in order to move, buy, and then there's kind of a wild type currency that you can use in order to move or buy. It lets you basically do anything. And so kind of trying to navigate the island, navigate the changing environment of that island while trying to outmove your opponent is going to be the trick of the game. And I like it for that. It's pretty good, it's easy to learn, as I said, and it does have a little bit of change as time goes on. But it's a game that, with repeated play, I think you can actually develop a strategy for and try and outsmart your other opponents. So if that sounds good to you, check it out. That is Hawaii from Rio Grande Games.
Number 85, Viticulture.
The next game on my list is a game about making wine, or actually less about making wine and more about running a vineyard. And that game is, well, Viticulture, which was a Kickstarter I was involved in doing the Kickstarter preview for, and now a copy has worked its way into my collection, and I'm glad that it has. This is a Euro-style game, a worker placement-style game, in which each player is running their vineyard. And yes, of course, running a vineyard is about making wine, but this game actually rewards you for attempting different strategies, be it giving tours of your winery, or selling your grapes off for money, and then using various different types of cards, visitors, to earn points in different ways. So it's not necessarily all about making the wine, but if you do decide to take that path, you can make reds or whites or blushes or sparkling wines, and dependent on what you make and who you can sell them to, you can get more victory points. The game definitely rewards strong strategy, so if you see a way to earn points that isn't necessarily the thematic way to get the points, but it works for you, it's definitely going to reward you for taking that different route, and hopefully you can come out on top by out-strategizing your opponents. That's one of the things that makes games fun to me, is being able to outwit rather than outluck my opponents, and so I think Viticulture is very rewarding in that fashion. If that sounds good to you, you should definitely check it out. That's Viticulture by Stonemaier Games. That's right, Stonemaier Games.
Number 84, Rex.
And now we have a game which is a little bit of a combination between the strategic and the thematic styles of game. I would still classify it as a more American style game, but it's one in which there's going to be a lot of conflict, and choosing the right strategy is certainly going to help you out a lot. This is, of course, Dune, or Rex, as it's now called. It has been reprinted by Final Fantasy Flight, and it has a Twilight Imperium theme rather than the old Dune theme, because the license wasn't able to be obtained. But in this game, you are trying to vie for strategic control of 3 different areas on the board. That is, if you're a solo player. And you can win simply by taking over these 3 different areas. Now, I say simply, but it's really not that easy. Instead, you can try and ally with some of the other players. And of course, alliances will be formed, and you'll try and compete for more areas. Once you ally with somebody else, you have to control more areas on the board in order to win the game. So you take the harder route of going it on your own and capturing 3 spots, or the easier route of allying with somebody, having to control more spots, but sharing a win. And I always hate sharing a win. I'm not a fan, but this game kind of forces you to make that decision at some points. So it's got a great theme. There's a deep, lore with the Twilight Imperium universe. It's got good strategy. Do I do this on my own? Do I want to take a little bit of a more diplomatic route? Do I want to battle it out? Do I want to agree and, ally with somebody else? That's all up to you. But whoever best manages to negotiate all of those choices will come out on top. So, if you're looking for a good thematic negotiation and combat game, check it out. That's Rex.
Number 83, Dungeon Lords.
So everybody's played a game where you play the heroes and you're going dungeon diving and you're trying to find the treasure or slay the monsters or whatever the case may be, but there's not a whole lot of games out there played from the perspective of the evil overlord who's running the dungeon. But this game, Dungeon Lords, is one where you're playing that very role. You have your own dungeon and you're trying to do your best using your minions in order to build it up. Now, it does this with a great amount of humor and a awesome Euro-style strategy. So this is a worker placement game where everybody's going to be placing their own workers behind a hidden screen, or behind a screen that hides their placement area. Essentially, you're going to lay out cards, and those cards are going to dictate where you'll place your workers on the board. And so you'll have choices of, making your dungeon a little bit more friendly, or you have the choices of going out and mining gold, or digging new tunnels for your dungeon, buying traps, whatever the case may be. But based on these decisions, you're going to build up your dungeon, you're going to accumulate renown, be it good or bad, and you're going to have money, and of course, maybe get some more minions along the way. But eventually you're going to have to fight off heroes that are going to come to destroy your dungeon. And whoever best prepares themselves for fighting off these heroes is going to win the game, because heroes are victory points. You defeat them and you capture them, and you get to keep them until the end of the game. Now, the cards you use each turn, you may not get to use on the next turn. And the monsters you use to fight the heroes, you may not have the next time around. Maybe you can't afford them, or maybe they get slain. But that's all part of the game. The writer of the rules, Vlaada Chvátil, the designer of the game, writes excellently humorous rules that I think you'll really enjoy reading. The artwork is fantastic, and the gameplay is really second to none. But not, again, my favorite game, but one that I enjoy quite a bit. So, if that sounds good to you, check it out. That's Dungeon Lords, a game with a lot of humor and some great strategic play.
Number 82, Sentinels of the Multiverse.
Coming in at number 82, we have the first cooperative game on my top 100, and that is going to be a card game called Sentinels of the Multiverse. This is a game by Greater Than Games that is gone through Kickstarters and multiple expansions, and is now, I think, very well established and very well received in the gaming community. Now, this is a game that's relatively simplistic. Each player gets their own hero, which is essentially a little bit of a deck of cards. So this box here has all kinds of decks of cards for heroes and villains, as well as different locations in the game. So each player has their own deck of heroes, as well as a hero card that gives them special abilities. And essentially all playing is really you have your deck. On your turn, you may play a card from your hand, you may activate a power on your card, do what that power says, and then you draw a card up. So play, power, draw. That's the whole game, at least on the player's turns. But the players are trying to combat a specific villain that has their own deck of cards. That deck of cards is full of minions and different types of actions, essentially, that the villain will take. And then that villain is fighting them in a specific location. And the location may benefit or hurt our heroes. But essentially, the goal is to complete the defeat of the villain, and each different villain has a different defeat scenario before the villain defeats the heroes. And each one of them may have a different type of defeat or a different way to defeat the heroes. So there's a lot of variety. It's a very simple game to learn, a very fun game insofar as there are so many different hero and villain combinations that you'll never see all of them, and one that I suggest anybody who's looking for an excellent cooperative game with a superhero theme. That is Sentinels of the Multiverse by Greater Than Games.
Number 81, Copycat.
The last game in our video today is very much so a Euro, but it's one by Rio Grande Games and Freeman Fries, who is the designer of Power Grid. And that game is Copycat. So first, I got to commend him for this cover. It's got a nice political style poster here. It's a little bit of an Obama parody, and it says, "Yes, we play" on it. I thought it was just a very clever cover. But in addition to that, he's cleverly copied the mechanisms from various different games, or the mechanics from various different games. He's taken worker placement, a little bit of deck building, and a little bit of a adjustable card market, and kind of mishmashed them all together to make a game that is very workable. Now, when you first think he's going to combine worker placement and he's going to take deck building and all this stuff and mash it together, you're like, well, that's definitely not going to work. But it comes out very elegantly. Each round of the game is essentially driven by a deck of cards and a worker placement mechanism, where you start out and you bid or ante a card each turn for turn order, and based on those cards you're able to move into the worker placement phase of the game. The worker placement phase can also be modified by cards from your hands. Maybe you're allowed to get more workers at the start of the round, or maybe you're allowed to place somewhere where somebody else has already placed based on a card that you bought from this adjustable card market. So you have worker placement, you have a deck full of cards that modify the worker placement, and then at the end of the round you spend the leftover cards from your hand in order to buy new cards to add to your deck. And the whole point is eventually to earn victory points by having enough money to buy the valuable cards that eventually come into this changing card market. So he's gone and he's used various different thoughts from different games, kind of taken them and modified them a little bit and made a well-designed, well-thought-out, and strategic game from them that plays very well. So if you want something that combines a lot of different things, it's a great way to introduce people to different styles of gaming. You can do it all with one cleverly designed game, Copycat by Freeman Fries. Well, so as I promised last time, they're not all Euro games. You see that there's some kind of Ameritrash or American-style games with a lot more theme. We have some card games, and we even have some games with a little bit of educational value. But anyhow, that's the next top 10, numbers 90 through 81. Please stay tuned and look out for another video where we go through numbers 80 to 71.